What a jam. Can always count on Justice to deliver a dancing good jam. But welcome everybody to today's Ceros Educate webinar, Adapting Ceros Templates. This we kind of envisioned as the successor webinar to my colleague Kelsey's fantastic Creating Ceros Templates webinar that she facilitated a couple of weeks ago. If you've yet to check that out, I would highly encourage you do so. That is actually, if you go onto the Educate site in our community tab, we've got webinars and events, and that is here in the on-demand webinars. Definitely check out Creating Ceros Templates because that's kind of going to go over how to create something from start to finish that you can use over and over again, provide organization and design best practices. Highly recommend checking that out if you have yet to do so. Today's webinar is going to focus on answering the question, what do you do if you've got a template or any experience really that doesn't quite meet your project's design needs? How do you adapt that into better suiting the goal of your project? So today's webinar really isn't going to focus on how to take, say a landing page and transform it into a newsletter. We're not going to get too specific there. This is really going to be more about strategizing on how to make the adapting process from A to B, experience A to experience B, a little bit more seamless and provide best practices on how to go about that. And I've broken this process down into 3 steps for you guys today. The first that we'll talk about is identifying the goal of your experience. Then we'll talk about step 2, which is isolating content that you can use when creating or adapting a template experience. And then third, Frankensteining an experience together using those isolated elements so that ultimately you have a template or, again, any experience that you want to serve a specific purpose that you previously didn't have before. As we're going through these topics, I will be providing some best practices and tips on how to make that process as seamless and efficient as possible for you all. And I'm sure you all have questions about what this process looks like for you specifically, or just kind of curiosities in general. So if it's something really specific, like, hey, Travis, I've got this landing page, how do I turn it into a newsletter? Or I've got a case study and I want to turn it into something else, rather than asking those questions in the Q&A box or within the chat box there in your little Zoom widget there, what you could actually do is go into our discussions board in the community, pop into design help, and feel free to leave your questions there. And we will be happy to kind of coach you along the way of adapting anything you got into ultimately what you want it to be. So again, today is really going to focus on strategizing of how to take a template that doesn't quite suit your needs just yet and how to get it there. Awesome. So let's get started, shall we? So my name is Travis. I am the digital content educator on the Ceros Educate team. As of this past week, I just hit my 3-year anniversary with the Ceros organization. When I initially came to the company, I actually started in the customer support department as a customer support specialist. So I've definitely been around the block, as they say, and dealt with a whole lot of different design and technical asks over my years here. I'm also a gigantic nerd. That is me at Galaxy's Edge, the Star Wars theme park, a couple of years back, where my wife and I created a little astromech droid that I then carried around with me for the rest of the trip. It was great. And since I'm also a gigantic nerd, I also named my 2 beautiful cats after Star Wars characters as well, Ahsoka and Sabine. So that's a little bit about me. If we've yet to meet each other in one of these webinars, if you attend our Educate webinars frequently, you'll probably see me again in the near future. But I'm very excited to be talking to you all about how to adapt a Ceros template in the studio. Yeah, and that's another thing I want to get out of the way too. The suggestions and tips that I will be overviewing today are really kind of more suited for studio users than editor users, because we're going to be talking about naming conventions, updating interactions, and potentially animations. And most of that stuff you can only do in the studio side of things. So that's another thing to keep in mind as well. So step 1, when you've got a template experience, or really any experience for that matter, that doesn't quite meet the needs of your project, the first thing to getting it there, to meeting that goal, is to identify what is the ultimate goal of this piece. Who is my audience? And is there an action that I want my viewers to take after viewing this experience? Is it to inform? Is it to generate leads? What is the purpose of this experience? So that is the first goal the first step in really creating any piece of content in the Ceros platform is figuring out who this is going to be viewed by and what purpose it serves or goal you have for the piece. And I think a great place to get some inspiration for your Ceros experiences is Ceros Inspire. Not only does this have templates that you can use as much of or as little of as you would like here, but there are also a number of examples from some folks that also use our tools, such as MLB, Pepsi, and these can be a great way just to see how other folks in similar industries, such as your own, are creating content that is impactful for their needs. So definitely worth, if you're kind of unsure of where do I take this template and how do I get it to serve my purposes better, maybe explore Inspire a little bit and just see how other folks are building out content of their own, just to kind of pull ideas from and see how, again, other folks are doing it. So I would start there. Get inspired. And then once you've kind of figured out the purpose of your piece, you've got a goal in mind, and you kind of roughly have an idea of how you want it to ultimately look, then you can start isolating pieces of content either from existing templates that your own team has created internally or ones from Inspire. And then just maybe you can use most of a template. Maybe you can use a specific section like a hero section or a carousel, whatever you think you can use in your experience, isolate those elements so that it's less manual work of coming up with that content from scratch, and you can largely leverage stuff that's already created to make that process easier on yourself. Another thing to call out here is the asset library, which is a relatively newer feature to the Ceros platform. This is available in both Studio and Editor. But with the asset library, you and your team can save multiple different elements from any and all of your experiences. And that's including, but not limited to, logos, buttons, CTAs, heck, entire sections of an experience if you want, really whatever you want to save into your asset library. Over time, you'll build up a number of these assets so that this process of adapting templates or any experience moving forward will be even easier on you because you'll have a huge library to pull from with all different types of widgets and modules to serve a whole bunch of different needs. And to sweeten the deal here, in our Educate site, if you click into the Community Designs tab right here, we've got our own little asset library. And these are all kind of a la carte modules that you are all welcome to use in any of your experiences as you're adapting your templates or, other stuff that your own team has created. So like with other templates, these will come with a import link within here. It'll say import to account. And then you can drop any one of these modules and use as much or as little of them as you would like, just to kind of help with, lessening the creation process, from scratch. So definitely worth calling these out and utilizing them if you feel that you can, use one of these elements in an experience as you're adapting something in your account. Cool. From there, once you have isolated what you want to use in your new experience, let's say maybe you've imported a landing page template from Ceros Inspire. The first thing I would do as you're compiling the new experience together is omit what you don't need in that experience, that template experience. So if you've got a landing page that you've got, like there's maybe a hero section that you would rather change, or something else that you don't need, get that out of there immediately, just because you will allow more canvas area to put in stuff that you do want into that experience. So that would be the first step I would take when you're kind of Frankensteining together your experience, is omit what you don't need in the template. And there are some things that can help with that process. One of the tools that I want to call out here is the canvas adjustment tool, which kind of looks like an ice cream sandwich icon. This is found in your studio's toolbar between your hotspot tool and the pen tool right here. And this can very quickly add or remove canvas from an experience. So if you need to get rid of an entire section, or maybe add a section, say in like the middle of an experience, rather than extending your canvas and moving all that content down or up the page, this really helps with that. So let me quickly show you what this looks like. So here we've got our landing page template that Kelsey actually went over in the Creating Ceros Templates webinar. And let's say that I wanted to get rid of this badges section right here. It's very easy to just, click on a folder of assets or delete assets from the canvas, right? That's pretty easy, just selecting it and pressing the delete button on your keyboard. But now I've got this huge chunk of white space. And you could, in theory, take all this content and drag it on up to that section and then shorten your canvas. But the far easier way of accomplishing this is by leveraging the canvas adjustment tool right here. So if I click on this, I can select an area in my canvas that I want to add or remove. So let's get it to right about there. And look at that. It just bumped all of that content up that was below that section that I deleted so that it's now right at where I need it to be beneath my first section. And that just took a couple of seconds. And this also works the other way too. So let's say I want to add a section beneath my badges section here of my landing page. Take the canvas adjustment tool, select this just beneath where I've started that section, or ended that section, I should say, and then add my canvas right here. Now I've got a perfectly blank section of the canvas that I can add to and expand upon within this experience. So definitely do not neglect the canvas adjustment tool as you are adapting Ceros templates moving forward. Another thing to call it, this is only available in the studio. Awesome. Once you have omitted the content that you don't need in your template experience, you can start adding the elements that you do want in there. And it's worth reiterating that anything in any experience, even if it came from Inspire or something that, your team created internally, literally anything can be copied and pasted between experiences. And I've actually embedded a interactive arcade created by our awesome multimedia designer, Alex, to kind of review this process of copying elements from one experience and pasting them into another. So first up is selecting the assets that you want to copy over. As you can see here, I've got an entire folder of content, this section right here selected. And then once you've selected those assets that you want to bring over from one experience into the one you're kind of Frankensteining together, then you can copy them by either right-clicking on those assets and selecting copy, or using the keyboard shortcut Command or Control C. From there, once your assets have been copied, you can open the experience that you are Frankensteining together into your new template that you're adapting. And then you can either use the keyboard shortcut Command V or Control V to paste that, or you could right click on the canvas and select Paste Here, like we've shown here. One thing I do want to call out when you're using keyboard shortcuts to copy and paste assets between experiences is that if you're using the Command V shortcut to paste assets in a new experience, keep in mind that those assets will be pasted in the exact canvas coordinates from the original experience. So meaning the X and Y coordinates. So maybe you've got a much shorter experience that you're compiling together than the one you copied the assets from. Maybe they were really far down the page. If you Command V those assets into the new experience, they're going to be probably way off your canvas because they were originally at a much lower place in the original canvas. So to get around that, to paste assets specifically in the section that you want them to be in, you can right click on your canvas and select paste here. So definitely keep that in mind as you're copying and pasting assets from between experiences. Another thing I want to call out here is if you are copying over interactive elements. So let's say a button that reveals a pop-up, a carousel, whatever you got going on, make sure that you are not only copying over the trigger, but also the targeted content with those triggers. Because if you were to only copy over a button from one experience that opened up a pop-up in the initial experience without copying over the pop-up as well, those assets from the original experience won't be present in the new experience, and thus that interaction won't work. So to illustrate this, I actually, in my own asset library here, have this open pop-up button, which is actually both the open pop-up trigger itself as well as the pop-up. So for those of you that are unfamiliar with the asset library, that is this icon right here. This is also an editor too, so you can use assets that you saved from studio experiences in editor experiences as well. But to use any one of the assets that you've saved to your asset library in an experience, you can open that up and then click and drag those assets right onto your canvas right here. So as you can see within my pop-up one group, not only do I have the trigger, which shows my pop-up, but I also have the pop-up content itself. So as you're saving elements, maybe from, one template into another, if it's something that's interactive, like I said, make sure you're saving both the trigger and the content that is targeted with that trigger. Otherwise, there won't be any content to view with that trigger in the new experience. And if you're unfamiliar with how to save content to the asset library, maybe you've got an entire section of content from the original template that you're adapting into a new one. Like we've got this badges section right here. You could save an entire folder of content if you wanted to. It doesn't have to be just individual assets. You can take an entire chunk of a template, right click on that in your layers panel, select save to asset library, and now you can use this section of content in any of your experiences moving forward. How cool is that? So look at this. Now that I've got it in my asset library, it's all there. So let me delete this section and I will add this to my canvas just beneath the original badges section. And it's all right there, guys. All of the content, all of the animations, any interactions that were there originally, they are all now here in this new section of my experience. Now, you might be thinking, what if I update these assets that I used from my asset library in the experience? Is there a way to update them in the asset library? Well, yes and no. So your assets will remain constant in your asset library. So whatever you save them as, they will remain as every time you copy and paste them, between different experiences. But if you want to save new versions of those assets, that process is the exact same as saving the original assets. So let's say I recolored some content. Maybe I updated the text copy in this section that I pasted over from my asset library. I'm just going to recolorize a couple of things here. What I could do then is take all of that content from the newly edited section, right click on that, and then save that to the asset library. So now I'll have the original version and the newly updated version right here. And if I make the determination later on that I don't need the original assets that I saved here, I could click into the options menu on those original assets, click remove, and get them out of there. And now I only have the updated version in here. So just to kind of quickly review what we just talked about, as you're compiling or Frankensteining together your new template, definitely take advantage of the canvas adjustment tool if you need to add or remove sections, and also saving content via the asset library so that you can use it and combine together elements from other templates and other experiences into the new one that will ultimately better serve your design purposes. Cool beans. One other thing to touch on here is mobile layouts. So a lot of the templates that you will find on Inspire will have mobile layouts as well. And if you're someone that has worked with the studio or editor in the past, you'll know that editing your different layouts, you'll have to make your changes on each one of the layouts independently. There are only a couple of things that really sync as you're making your edits between maybe your desktop and your mobile layout. So sync text is one of those things, and synced objects is the other. But everything else, so to give you an example, let's say maybe I added a new image or a module to my desktop version, I would also need to make that change on the mobile version as well. And let's say you've got an experience or a template that you imported from Inspire that you don't need the mobile version from. You can see what layouts are available in an experience with the global layouts button here at the top of the studio. And this is also in the same area in editor. So right now in this experience, I only have a desktop layout. I do not have a tablet or a mobile layout, but if I did, I would be able to delete those other layouts if I did not need them for this specific experience. But it's definitely worth calling out to be mindful of your mobile version, if ultimately you're going to have this experience or template be served to mobile users as well. All right. Now that we've kind of talked about Frankensteining together experiences, I'd like to share with you all a couple of best practices as you're kind of adapting your template experiences. And a lot of these will kind of echo what Kelsey talked about in the creating Ceros templates, but we've kind of spun these in more of, making adjustments to something that's already existing. So one, be mindful of your naming conventions. As you can see here in the experience that Kelsey put together for our landing page, all the content is very neatly named and organized into separate folders so that it's very easy to find, the content in your different sections. That will help you out so hugely in the long run. Really, guys, I can't stress it enough. Not only with, like we saw earlier, with saving sections, if you want to add those to the asset library, but it also will just help you find these different sections and assets down the road so much easier. I promise. And consistency really is key. So keep your naming conventions consistent as you're adapting and making changes to your template experiences. So, if you've got section one kind of spelled out like this, make all of your other sections similar to that, and keeping your language consistent with your organization. And as you're changing your content, be it the interactivity or just the design in general, make sure you're updating the asset names and renaming your hotspots to reflect those changes. So, for example, if I changed my section one to be maybe like a user spotlight section in that landing page versus the badges section, I would want to rename that section both in my layers, or on any other hotspot that applies to. So I've got this, in my menu right here, I've got a hotspot to take you to the Educate site login. And maybe I have this going to a different URL as I'm adapting this into something else. You're going to want to make sure you're renaming those hotspots and interactive elements as well to reflect those changes. Because again, not only will that help you make it easier to search for those assets later, but as a reminder, and we talk about this a lot in our Studio 101 training sessions, whatever you call your hotspots in the studio is what they will ultimately show up as in your analytics. So as to not confuse any internal folks on, what a hotspot does and making sure it's clearly conveyed what that interaction is there, make sure you're updating your hotspots or other design elements in your content as you're adapting it for new content creations. Next, we can talk about future proofing and making editor friendly templates. And again, this is another point that Kelsey brought up in creating Ceros templates. So as you're going through and adapting a template into something else, you can limit what future editor users are able to adjust in, subsequent iterations of those experiences. So let's say I've got a section that I want to remain consistent in all future versions of this experience that I'm building out as a template. I don't want anyone to adjust maybe the logo or some of the language in a specific section or element. Once I've selected that section, and this can be done with folders as well, I can move down in the design tab to where it says editor settings, and I can uncheck this box, therefore prohibiting any users that are making updates to this experience in the future, maybe via editor, they will be unable to edit that content that I unchecked in the editor settings. Another thing to take account of is if you know you're going to be making image adjustments and replacing images in future versions of a template experience, I would strongly recommend masking your images. So for example, we've got these tiles down here. All these images are placed within masks. And the purpose of that is if you've got an image that maybe is a slightly different aspect ratio or a different size, these masks will really help keep the original frame that was there originally from the first incarnation of this experience consistent through all subsequent updates of your imagery. So I'll always have this frame in my mask that I can place a new image within. So I'll show you what this looks like. If I were to replace this first tile image using the replace image function here in my design tab, I'm just going to grab a stock photo. You'll see that when I replace it, it remains in that frame and it looks seamless with the rest of my images here. So that's another thing to keep in mind as you're adapting and changing an experience from one thing into another is masking your images. That way the process of replacing images down the road can be a lot easier and you can keep your frames consistent in each new iteration of your experience. So I know Kelsey touched on how to create internal templates in an experience, or from an experience, I should say. But did you know that you can also make updates to your internally created templates? So in the templates tab right here, when you're in your admin, you will find all of your internally created templates in the template gallery right here. And maybe there will come a time where these templates will need huge changes, and you might not want the original versions present for any user to stumble upon or use, unintentionally in future versions of those experiences. So what you can do is find the template that you want to make an update to. Click the Manage Template button while you've selected the options menu on that template. You'll first want to disable that template before you make any changes, because if you were just to pop into design right here on your internal template, the studio will give you a notification saying, hey, you can't do this because this is an enabled template right now, so you got to disable it first. So while you're opening the Manage Template section, or module, I should say, while you're viewing your internal templates, turn off that template, disable it, and then you can pop into design in the studio, make your updates as needed to that template that you've created with your team, and then you can re-enable the template. That way everyone can start using it again. Awesome. So I know we just covered a lot in a short span of time. I've been gabbing for about 30 minutes now, but hopefully going through this conversation today allowed you all to kind of formulate a strategy of how you can take a template and turn it into something else. Like I said at the top of the training, or the top of the webinar today, there are so many different ways of adapting experiences and turning them from one thing into another. So really, again, the purpose of this webinar was to illustrate the process of, finding the goal, isolating the goal of your experience, what it's ultimately going to serve as, figuring out what you can borrow from existing Inspire or internal templates, and then making it work through a couple of the techniques that I showed. But now I would like to hear from you all about any questions that we might have on this process, or just any curiosities we have in general regarding adapting templates. And it looks like we've got one here from Annette asking, can you quickly show how to mask? Absolutely. So I'll actually just pop into the studio. I'm going to create a new page for this so that I don't clutter the original one here. So step one, Annette, whenever you want to mask an image, first you'll obviously want to bring in that image into your canvas. And then maybe I want to put this into a circle mask rather than a rectangle frame that this currently has. To mask something, you'll want to utilize our shape tools in the shape menu right here. I'll grab the oval tool, and then I'm going to place this on top of my image right here. Center that up nicely. And then after I've selected both of those assets in my layers panel, like so, I can right click on them and select mask, and boom, there we go. And then I'm also able to adjust the crop or how large the image is within that mask, just by selecting the image itself within the mask. Awesome. Cool. Looks like we're pretty light on questions today. Does anyone out there have any questions on the process? You're welcome, Annette. Does anyone out there have any questions on adapting templates or something else studio related regarding the asset library that I can help answer while you've got me? If not, I'm happy to give back a couple minutes to your days, but just wanted to make sure that we are addressing any questions that could possibly still be out there. How are we feeling, gang? Ooh, Anna Karina's got a question. What is the difference between making groups or folders? That is a fantastic question. So, folders are really kind of just there for organization purposes, whereas groups are more for when you want a number of layers to act as a singular unit. Because you can make your groups, I mean, you can also make folders the target of interactions and animations too, but that's kind of more suited for groups, because you can also with your groups, let's say maybe you've applied object states to elements within your groups. You can use your groups as the trigger for any elements that are within that have object states applied to them. So again, just to kind of reiterate, folders are really just more for organizing content, whereas groups allow objects to be treated as a singular unit that you can make the target of interactions or animations. That's kind of the primary difference there. And we also have an article on Educate that kind of delves into this a little bit more. I'll actually share this in the chat right now if you want to take a little bit of a deeper dive on the difference between folders and groups. Yeah, absolutely. Cool. Any other questions? Ooh, David's got a question. What is the name of the prerequisite training to this one? Yeah, so that was actually a webinar, David. That was in, you can find that in webinars and events in our on-demand webinars section right here. Kelsey led a fantastic webinar on creating Ceros templates. So this kind of talks more about the building stage, whereas today's session focused on more how to make changes to an existing piece of content. So I'll also drop a link to that in our chat if you want to review that. You're very welcome, David. And also, if you liked this landing page format, we also have a link in that webinar page to import that into your account if you want to use bits and pieces of that as well. You are welcome to do so. Cool. All right, gang. Kristen's got a question. Will you be sending a recorded version of this? Yes, absolutely. You will be receiving a follow-up email, and it will also be in our on-demand webinars if you want to find it later down the road. So yes, absolutely, Kristen. You will be able to review back this recording whenever you would like. You're welcome. All right, gang. Any last questions, thoughts, concerns? And again, this process of adapting Ceros templates will look completely different from one user to the next, depending on, what purpose and goal you have in mind for your experience. So I want to reemphasize that you can always pop into our discussion boards here on Educate and ask us for design help if you need a little bit of coaching getting you from point A to point B. All right. It seems like that is all the questions. So we'll wrap it there. But thank you all so much for joining us for adapting Ceros templates today. We hope you had a good time and learned a little bit more about what this process could potentially look like for you. Please keep your eyes locked on educate.ceros.com for any upcoming guides, videos, and webinars that we got coming down the pipeline. And from all of us here at Educate, we hope to see you at a future webinar. Take care, everybody.